you're on the record in case number 2023-00360, electronic application of FRON BN LLC, otherwise known as Frontier Solar, for a certificate of construction for an approximately 120 megawatt merchant solar electric generating facility and non-regulated electric transmission line in Marion and Washington counties, Kentucky, pursuant to KRS 278-700 and 807 KAR 5110. My name is Kent Chandler. I'm chair of the Kentucky Public Service Commission, and as such, chair of the Kentucky State Board on Electric Generation and Transmission Siting. Joining me today are PSC Commissioners Vice Chair Angie Hatton and Commissioner Mary Pat Regan. Joining me remotely are the other siting board members, John Lyons, proxy for statutory member Rebecca Goodman, who is the Secretary of the Energy and Environment Cabinet, Sydney Montgomery, serving as proxy for Jeff Knoll, Secretary of the Cabinet for Economic Development, and Judge David Daugherty, who of the two respective judge executives was chosen by the governor in this position. The other ad hoc member, Lisa Hayden, is not present today, but will be participating in the case. At this time, I would ask anyone in the room to please turn off your phones or to silence them. Anyone that is remote, I'd ask that you stay on mute unless or until it's time for you to speak, and then you can leave your camera on if you would like. The purpose of today's hearing is to take evidence in this case. Before we get started, we'll have an entry of appearance of counsel for the applicant.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Gregory Dutton. I'm here on behalf of Frontier Solar. I have with me today my co-counsel, Pr Stevenson. We have 5 witnesses prepared to testify today.
You have 5. Who is that? I have witnesses Albre, Fletcher, Shugaluri. Good, close enough. Sorry. Mangum,
And we also have Rich Kirkland.
Rich Kirkland with Kirkland Appraisers. Okay.
Correct.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Dutton. Mr. Dutton, did you file a notice or a motion for substitution?
That's a good question, Your Honor. I think it was a notice.
Okay. All right, that makes that easier. So it's my understanding that with that, the only 2 outstanding pleadings in the case are the 2 motions for confidential treatment with the motion for deviation aside.
That's correct. We have those 3 outstanding motions.
3 outstanding motions.
2 for confidentiality, the 1 for the deviation.
All right, and of course, we'll take up the motion for deviation on a substantive basis in the final order in this case.
Understood.
All right. It's my understanding that public notice was filed into the Springfield Sun and the Lebanon Enterprise on April. The notice was given on April the 24th, and proof of that notice was filed on the record on the 25th. Is that right, Mr. Dutton?
That sounds correct, Your Honor.
Okay. All right. There's no one that has indicated. Oh, I'm sorry. Do you have anything else, Mr.
I do not.
All right, perfect. No one has indicated their interest in providing public comments remotely this morning pursuant to the notice that was given. I would note that as anybody watching this live or prior to submission of the case, public comments may be submitted at any time during the pendency of a matter. You can file public comments in a number of ways, including emailing them to the Public Service Commission at psc.comment@ky.gov. We just ask that any comments in the case indicate your name, where you're from, and the case number, which in this matter is 2023-00360. The other ways to provide public comment are located on our website, psc.ky.gov. Okay. All right. Mr. Dutton, would you like to call your first witness?
I would, Your Honor. Our first witness is Mr. Joe Albrecht.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct under penalty of perjury?
I do.
Okay. Please state your name and address for the record.
Joseph Albrecht, 515 North Flagler Drive, West Palm Beach, I forgot the zip code. But that's the headquarters for Bright Night. My personal address is at 254 Beach Road, Southgate, Kentucky.
Okay. Mr. Dutton, sorry, for Judge Daugherty's benefit, what we'll do, Judge, is I'll give it back to Mr. Dutton here for a minute to ask some introductory questions of his witness. Since his witness didn't pre-file direct testimony, I'll allow him to conduct whatever direct examination he would like in support of his application. I'll turn it over to our staff attorneys here at the Public Service Commission who are representing the members of the citing board. They'll conduct some questions of this witness specific to the items that he's here to discuss. And then I'll turn it over first to Deputy Secretary Lyons and then to Mr. Sidney and then yourself to ask any questions of this witness. He can indicate whether he can answer, whether he knows the response, or whether there's somebody else that if he doesn't know the answer, he can have respond. The three commissioners will ask questions if we have any, and then we'll turn it back over to Mr. Dutton to ask any clarifying questions of his witness before moving on to the next witness. So I just wanted to give you the heads up on the process this morning. Mr. Dutton has 5 witnesses based on experience. The first one's what do they say, the first cut is the deepest. Mr. Dutton, you would like to ask any questions?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Albre, just as a housekeeping matter, can you explain what you have up there with you in terms of materials?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I have 2 binders representing, I think, the balance of the documents we've provided to the PSC as part of the application and any of the data requests.
And do you have any other notes or anything like that with you?
I do not.
Mr. Chairman, with your approval, I'll leave the binders up there for all the witnesses.
That'd be fine, thank you. Counsel? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's okay.
Mr. Albre, can you explain who you work for?
I work for Bright Night LLC.
And what was your role in preparing these materials for this application?
I was the lead project developer.
Okay. And how long have you been with Bright Night?
I've been with Bright Night since June of 2022 and the lead developer for Frontier for that time.
Okay. And you did support the materials that were provided here, including several discovery requests, responses. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is there anything that's in the record that you would like to modify or amend?
Yes, sir.
And what is that?
In the application on page 3, paragraph 4, the sentence reads, the non-regulated electric transmission line will be approximately 250 feet from the nearest non-participating residential structure. We'd like to amend the 250 to say 50 feet.
And why is that?
We identified a resident along the transmission line that's approximately that distance from the line.
Mr. Chairman, with your approval, I'd like to supply a handout to everyone that shows exactly where we're talking about.
That'd be fine. You'd like to mark this applicant's exhibit 1?
I would. Thank you.
If you would, Mr. Dutton, I know you gave one to the reporter, and that's fine, but I also know that you have this digitally. For the benefit of not having to print it and then rescan it to include it as a hearing exhibit, would you mind to send a PDF of this so that we can include that
We'd be happy to.
sharper version? Thank you.
Mr. Albre, can you explain what we're looking at here? Is I just handed it out as Exhibit 1?
Yes, sir. This is part of the GenTie line or high voltage transmission line leading from the project substation to the point of interconnect with LG and EKU. We're about halfway along the line, maybe a little bit more than that, where the line makes a turn, heads south along Springfield Road, also known as Highway 55. Right at this corner, there's this smaller parcel labeled Nally on here, 055005. We identified that there's a resident on that parcel, and as the transmission line is making the turn to head south, that's where the line is in close proximity to that residence.
Is that resident now a participating landowner?
Bright Night has, since identifying the resident, signed an easement with that party, so we do have an agreement in place with them.
Has that agreement been filed into the record of this case?
It is not.
Would we be able to do that in the next week?
We would be able to provide that document.
Okay. Mr. Albright, is there anything else in the record that you'd like to address or correct?
Not at this time.
With that, I'll turn to the witness for further examination.
Counsel?
Yes. Mr. Albright, if I ask you any questions and you're not able to answer those questions and there's a better witness that can, just please let me know, okay?
Certainly.
A site layout was filed with the siting board on March 17th in response to a staff request for information. Is that the most up-to-date site plan?
It is.
Do you expect that to be your final site plan?
We'll submit a final site plan prior to construction starting.
Do you expect to be, or do you anticipate any major changes to your site plan?
Not at this time, no.
What is your anticipated construction start date?
That'd be in Q2 of 2025.
How long do you anticipate that construction will take?
We anticipate concluding construction at the end of 2026.
The total project acreage is listed at 1,411 acres. What is the total fence acreage of the project?
In the application, I think we referenced 953 acres, and that would be within the fence. The difference is exclusions that were stated by the landowners in their agreements.
There's no planning or zoning in Marion or Washington counties and no local ordinances that the projects will have to comply with. Can you outline some of the contact that you've had with the executives of those counties?
Certainly. Yeah, since I joined the project in 2022, I've met with the judge executives in both counties on several occasions to provide updates as to our progress, mainly with regard to land procurement or signing of leases or easements. We've also met with both counties' economic development groups, and actually did provide a presentation in Marion County at one of their monthly kind of get-togethers. Yeah.
How much contact would you say total? Like 2 in Marion County? How many meetings total would you have met?
I've met with both the judge executives and the economic development councils at least on 2 occasions, yes, each.
In your response to the staff request for information, it indicated that there are going to be a couple of structures that are going to be demolished. Can you explain what those structures are?
Yes, there are 2 structures that we mentioned. One is on the Mangum property, which is on the eastern side of the layout. It's a dilapidated barn. I think that's part of the older kind of homestead on that farm. We have not actually asked the owner if we can demolish it. I would just say that that's a proposal. We'll follow up with the landowner to see if we can remove that, but that would add some additional area for modules to be placed. The second structure is on the Graves property, which is on the northernmost side of the layout. That is, I would call it like a temporary barn structure, like a pole barn, kind of a temporary white covered roof. I believe that's mobile, but as of right now in our layout, it shows a exclusion around it, or rather a setback, apologies, not a formal exclusion.
Do you have the permission of the landowner to demolish that structure?
Not at this time. That's why I would suggest it's a proposed structure.
Both of those landowners are participating.
They are, yes.
Can you describe to the siting board what is a farm-friendly wooden post?
Is this with respect to the external fencing?
Yes.
Yeah, I believe that refers to just having a 7-foot fence that, rather than having steel poles, it is simply a wooden pole structure.
Have you, Frontier Solar, developed a stormwater or runoff plan?
We'll develop a final stormwater plan further into the construction planning. I think we have prepared an initial outline of best practices in the application.
How will you or Frontier Solar handle dust control?
Similarly, we have provided kind of best practices for dust mitigation, including things like watering the roads, covering trucks that have dirt in them and could create dust. Similarly, if there are fill piles or loose dirt on the site, trying to keep those wetted or covered. But I believe once again, we have that in the application.
And so will both of those plans be finalized as you get closer to construction by your EPC?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, we plan to select an EPC essentially following this hearing sometime this quarter. The majority of those conversations will happen with that party to finalize those plans.
Can you explain how, moving on to vegetative screening, can you explain how it was decided where the vegetative screening was going to be placed?
Yeah, certainly. And just kind of qualifying the site a bit more, the site's set back from a lot of the public right-of-ways in the area. We've kind of explained it to the public as being in folks' backyards. It's actually quite hard to see the site from a public right-of-way. However, once again, we kind of followed best practices in establishing where we would put vegetative screening. The main area, if you're referring to the application where we've added vegetative screening, is on the western side of the site along McLean Road. That is where the residences that are non-participating landowners are closest to the site. That's the majority of it. The other location is on the northern side of the site, adjacent to the Graves property. There's a neighborhood, kind of more dispersed homes on that side of the site, where they can see just a couple acres of the Graves property. So we've decided to add screening there. There was only one occasion where one of the participating landowners recommended screening for his neighbor. So he just didn't want the neighbor, essentially they have a pool next to their house, and they didn't want them to be able to see it from their backyard. So that's the only time a landowner actually requested specific screening.
The trees that are going to be planted for the vegetative screening, are those going to be native to Kentucky?
Several of the species are. So on that same plan, if anyone's looking at that, we've listed dogwoods and eastern redbuds that are native. Those are deciduous trees. They're also evergreens, so white pines are also listed in that plan. And we've actually contacted one of the local companies just nearby the site that can provide some of those trees potentially. So that's nice as well.
When is it going to be decided which species of trees are actually going to be planted? Because you list several different ones.
Yeah, I think and just to clarify, so the screening will be a mix of species, so it won't just be like one homogeneous type all the way along. The actual, selection of the trees will happen during the EPC process.
What will the spacing be between the solar panels?
Between the solar panels, the actual design of the spacing will be finalized once again as we head through final engineering. Initial designs had the spacing and ground coverage at something between 30 and 36% in all of the scenarios we've run.
Do you know how high the bottom of the panels will be from the ground?
About 18 to 24 inches at full tilt.
What will be the ground cover underneath the panels?
It will be a grass mix,
Will gravel be used at all?
only for access roads.
How many vehicles do you anticipate going to the site each day?
Let me refer to the traffic study.
Excuse me, just to clarify, are you talking about during operations or
During
construction?
construction.
During construction.
Okay, I'm referring to the traffic study that was prepared by ERM. I'm on page 6, section 4. We mentioned that there'll be less than 150 round trips daily.
Will the project substation have its own separate fencing?
The project substation itself will be within the outer perimeter of the fence, so no.
Will there be?
I'm sorry, no, that doesn't.
So yeah, I can clarify.
So will the substation have fencing?
Yes, provided by the fencing around the project itself.
Okay.
So yeah, to clarify that, if you looked at the substation pad, it wouldn't have its own fence around it.
Okay. So it's within, you use the word outside to make it seem like it's not gonna have a fence and it's outside of the footprint of the rest of the facility. You're saying it will not have its own fence, but it is inside the footprint of the rest of the facility.
That's correct.
So the fence to qualify for NESC obligations is the primary fence around the entire generating facility.
Yeah, around that sub portion of the layout. Yes, sir.
Okay, and they have oil field breakers, or is there any, does that substation have to have an oil contamination barrier?
I'd have to defer to our engineer. Thank you.
Will there be 2 acres of native pollinators?
Oh, I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Will there be 2 acres of native pollinators?
Are you saying two, the number 2?
2 acres.
We have not planned native pollinator acreage at this time.
When is the landscaping proposed to be done? During construction, at the last stage of construction?
This is with respect to the screening.
Yes, it is.
Okay. I think that plan will be finalized with the EPC company. But yeah, ideally it's performed during the springtime.
Have there been any requests to change vegetative screening from non-participating landowners?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that one more time?
Has there been any request to change vegetative screening by non-participating landowners?
Not at this time.
Were the leases and easements for the project, were those filed with the county clerk's office?
A memorandum has been, yes.
In reviewing the leases, it looks like some of the leases are between the landowners and Bright Light and landowners and FRON. Can you explain why that is?
Frontier is a subsidiary of Bright Night LLC.
How does, when you look at, filed a response and one of the responses included the organizational chart for Bright Night, who is going to be responsible for hiring the employees for Frontier Solar Project,
For the operational,
for the construction?
oh, the construction, so that would be at the Bright Night level.
Will Frontier Solar, will they have any employees at all?
Not at this time.
Who will be responsible for ensuring that all the mitigation measures are followed during the construction?
Bright Night will have a construction management team that's on staff and there to oversee the construction of the site. Bright Knight will also have a EPC in place, as we discussed earlier. That EPC will carry out anything that's a part of this.
And going back to the employees, will it be an actual contractor that's going to employ and hire the construction workers, or is it going to be Bright Knight?
The EPC firm will be hiring the employees.
Do we know who that is, who the EPC firm is?
We have not made a selection of the EPC firm yet.
What entity will employ the individuals that will be responsible for compliance for the certificate of construction during operations?
Bright Knight has a management arm that's actually not listed on the org chart that we provided to you. They would be the party that's carrying out operations.
And going to that, when you look at your organizational chart, where does the Bright Knight management fit in your organizational chart?
From Bright Knight LLC at the top, that's bifurcated into Bright Knight Management Company LLC, and then Bright Knight, the holdco, down to Frontier.
Is Bright Knight owned by any other company?
They're not.
Moving on to your motion for deviation that was filed. There are no local setbacks for this project. There are 4 residential neighborhoods within 2,000 feet, is that correct? In your motion, you included a table with the distances to the closest residences. Is that table still accurate as far as the distances?
Give me one moment to pull up the deviation.
That's tab 19, page 3.
Thank you.
I assume that's the correct page that you're on? Okay.
Yes, that table should be accurate.
It looks like the closest panel would be in neighborhood number 2, with it being 271 feet. Is that correct?
Yeah, we believe that to be correct. The 271 number was verified by ERM in their study.
What type of outreach for that particular neighborhood was conducted by Frontier Solar?
The initial public information meeting notices were sent to those neighborhoods. But other than that, we've not engaged with them directly unless they're a potential participating landowner.
So no door-to-door knocking on doors to any of those residencies?
That's correct.
What is the distance from the closest panel to any residence?
The 270 feet that's listed in the.
That's for the neighborhood, but for any single home, do you know that?
There was that correction this morning to 50 feet. Does that affect that?
That was with respect to the transmission line.
If you're not, that's something we'll ask for a post-hearing data request if you're not able to answer it. What is the distance from the closest panel to any residence, any central inverter, or the closest substation?
I know we have it in the ERM study, so when Michael's on the stand, perhaps he can go into more detail with those.
And who was that? Which one is-
Michael Tincher with ERM.
We're also happy to clarify in a post-hearing data request.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you keep saying ERM study, that's the noise.
Yes, noise study.
Moving on to the geotechnical report and karst, what is being done? I know the project area is located in a karst region. What is being done to address the karst issues?
Yeah, a couple of things have been done. We have hired Tetra Tech to do both a desktop study and a field study to try to identify karst features on the site. Both studies came back relatively benign in that the locations that were identified turned out to be mostly cattle ponds, essentially. So there were small depressions that may look like a karst feature from an aerial survey, but upon field surveys, they were nothing more than that. So at this time, we don't have any serious concern about karst in the area. We will, of course, monitor it, and if the EPC during construction were to identify something, we would, of course, have a mitigation plan in place.
Can you detail some of the public involvement that you've had, Frontier Solar has had with this Marion County and Washington County communities?
We held both a public information, or let me rephrase. We held a public information meeting in both counties to ensure both counties had equal opportunity to participate and learn about the project. So we did one at a restaurant in Washington County, and then one at the golf course in Marion County on separate days. Residents from around the project were notified for both public information meetings.
On average, how many people attended those meetings?
The first meeting was better attended. We had about 30 people at the Marion County one, probably about 10 at the Washington County one. It was in the following week or so.
And you spoke earlier about how there's been only one recommendation as far as changing the vegetative screening. Is there any other, from a participating or non-participating, has there been any recommendation or suggestions by those landowners?
Not at this time, other than the one we mentioned.
Has there been any request from anyone in the community, from residents or officials, about changing the layout of the project?
Not at this time.
Are you able to answer questions about the transmission line?
Yes.
Can you describe to the siting board about where the transmission line will actually start and where the transmission line will actually end?
Certainly. Yeah, if you're referring to our application, we have a few helpful maps in there. I'll pull that up as well and speak to it.
Just let us know what you're looking at.
Yep. So in our application, Exhibit A, we have several site maps, and there's a detailed view of the transmission line route. I believe it's listed as sheet 4 of 5 of the layouts, and then also sheet 5, or sorry, just sheet 4. So we're looking at the southern half of the site, or really the southernmost side of the solar array. The project substation is going to be located on that southern end. It's noted at the top of that map. The project GenTie, or transmission line, as we've been referring to it, will be at 138 kV and travel southeast to the point of interconnect, which is an LG&E substation in Marion County. It's about 1.7 miles from the project location.
Is the Lebanon substation, is that outside of the project boundaries?
It's outside of the solar array, if that's what you're defining as the project boundary.
Who will own the transmission line, Frontier Solar or LG&E?
Frontier Solar would own the GenTie line, And at the substation, there would be a point of change of ownership to LG&E.
Who is going to be responsible for paying the interconnection costs?
Frontier Solar is responsible for those.
Can you describe to the siting board where this project is as far as in the interconnection process?
Yeah, so Frontier filed an interconnection request with LG&E. We've gone through all phases of their studies. I believe the last element of that was a PJM affected system study, which is since concluded. I believe we're at the point where we can sign a GIA, and LG&E's stated in their documents that it'll take them anywhere between 18 and 24 months to complete any necessary network upgrades.
Do you expect that the route to the transmission line is going to change any?
Other than the amendment that we mentioned this morning, no.
Were any alternative routes considered?
One alternative in terms of crossing Highway 55 earlier, so Highway 55 runs north-south. Once again, if you're referring to the map, it would have been a little bit easier had we been able to cross the highway to reach the substation directly. But other than that, no. There are only 3 or 4 landowners along the path that kind of drive the main direction and orientation of the route.
Is it correct that the MV collection system will be underground for all segments?
The medium voltage transmission line? Yes, at this time, that's our expectation.
In response to staff request for information, it was stated that there's not going to be a power purchase agreement. Is that correct?
That's correct at this time. We're in late-stage negotiations with LG&E for a build transfer agreement.
And where are you in that process? Has the agreement been finalized?
The agreement has not been finalized.
If an agreement is not able to be reached with LG&E, is the project still going to proceed?
Bright Knight would have to seek alternative offtake, so a PPA agreement or something else of that nature, or at a later date, work with LG&E.
Say that an agreement is able to be made, at what point will the project actually be sold? Is it gonna be sold after construction? Is it gonna, after construction is built and it's gonna be in operation for a year? Are you expecting that when do you think it'll actually?
Oh, sorry, could you clarify? Is this under the
Under the
pretense that
build
the
transfer,
PTA
yeah.
occurs as currently stated? Yeah, Bright Knight or.
No, I'm sorry, you're talking about two different things.
Yeah,
So
sorry.
You're,
Could you clarify?
you said build transfer, and then you said PPA. Two different distinctions there.
Yep.
Which one were you saying, the status quo expectation, a PPA or a build transfer?
Build transfer
Okay.
is the current situation, yes.
Okay, so can you answer the question under that context?
Yes. So under that context, Bright Knight or Frontier would build the project. The project would become operational, and then LG&E would assume ownership of it.
As far as decommissioning, do all the leases contain removal of the underground cabling?
Yes, all of our leases have a decommissioning clause in it, which do describe removing all the equipment from the site down to 3 feet below surface.
Could you explain the process that will be taken to ensure that the soil quality will be maintained so that it will be useful for agriculture after the operation cease?
So this is in the kind of reclamation of the site. What type of soil will be provided?
Well, what type of process, so after the project ends, that the soil will be able to be used again for agriculture?
Yeah, I believe in our decommissioning plan, we identify that it'll be a suitable soil that's replaced, I guess particularly where cabling's removed from locations, but also where piles are are pulled up from the site.
No further questions at this time, Chairman.
Deputy Secretary, do you have any questions for this witness?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Sorry that I had trouble getting the mute button off. Good morning, Mr. Albre.
Morning.
Just, can you give me a little more detail on this build and transfer mechanism? I'm not sure that I'm aware of the parameters that surround that and how that exactly works.
I guess the most elemental description of it would be that Bright Knight would continue to develop the project, plan the project, move to a construction phase with the project, bring the project into operation, and then LG&E would purchase the project from Bright Knight or Frontier, or assume ownership of Frontier, and then, yeah, have ownership of the project, potentially operate it. Yeah, that's the basic structure of that.
Is that a typical mechanism that Bright Knight uses in development of solar projects?
Are you asking if it's a typical industry deal structure?
Well, yeah, that could be one question, but I was asking specifically about Bright Knight.
Bright Knight's not entered into another one of these agreements. This would be the first one that Bright Knight is doing. But yeah, I would add that it is a fairly standard industry structure. Many utilities throughout the country are moving to own solar and wind renewable assets.
Thank you. Ms. Carr covered several areas. She's getting really good at this. I don't have to ask many questions anymore, but I will ask some follow-up questions on a couple of things. We talked about the geotech, the Carr study, and a mitigation plan if necessary. If y'all do encounter karst features, let's say a sinkhole develops or you do find a sinkhole, what is the typical setback on that? Can you answer that question?
That's a good question. We would definitely establish a plan for if a sinkhole or any kind of karst feature was identified on the site during construction, what the appropriate plan and mitigation of that would be. At this time, we're planning on setting back from things like wetland features about 25 feet. So that might be an appropriate response to that. If it were severe, it may be that, yeah, you have to kind of qualify what type of feature that is before making a decision like that.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Carr, I was also asked you about demolition of buildings. Has a phase one been done, or is that still in the works?
We have completed a phase one ESA as well as wetland delineations on the site.
Has the phase one been submitted for the record?
I don't believe the full study has been.
What about
We can submit that if you'd like that.
you say wetlands mitigation?
Sorry,
Are you not
delineation.
talking about excuse me?
A wetland delineation study, so just kind of
Yeah.
inventorying where wetlands are.
Have you, is that the Corps' jurisdictional determination? Is that what you're talking about? Is it something different?
We haven't gone to that step yet to actually fully establish them as jurisdictional waters or anything of that nature, but we've at least done the field studies to determine where they should be.
But that, I think I read that that's coming in the third quarter of this year. Is that still scheduled for the jurisdictional determination?
Yes, that's correct.
Along those lines, and this may be a question for Mr. Tensioner, I'm not sure, but I'll if it is, just defer to him.
Okay.
So I read in in your latest submittal, the critical analysis report, it spoke to waters of the U.S. and significant nexus to navigable waters. I'm assuming that is in concert with the recent Supreme Court ruling in the Sackett case to some degree. I guess this is more of an advisement than it is a question. We also have waters of the Commonwealth. The Sackett ruling kind of took ephemeral and intermittent streams and the significant nexus determination to a new level that we haven't seen before. But we still have waters of the Commonwealth, which essentially is every stream. It includes intermittent and ephemeral, as well as perennial streams and wetlands. So just be advised of that. I don't know what this development plan had in terms of impacts to any streams, but there still is a waters of the Commonwealth matter that you need to take into consideration when looking at impacts to streams.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll take that under advisement. And at this time, the layout does avoid any kind of floodplain or noted wetlands in our studies.
Ms. Carr also asked you about vegetative screening. I would just point out that the list of species y'all had in there, a couple of them were non-native. The wax myrtle and the giant thuja that you all had in there. I don't think we'd like to see those species used as vegetative screening. And my last question, Mr. Albre, if you can address this. I was a little confused about the initial filings regarding natural and cultural resources. I think it indicated there were no archaeological sites, but then the critical analysis report did say that there were at least 6 archaeological. So has there been any consultation with, or is there planned consultation with our state historic properties on this project?
There's not been to date. We can definitely bring those up with them. I believe that there were 2 points that I was actually reviewing with Praneeth, our engineer, that were flagged in that study. One was an older bridge that was north of the site. I believe it's just a county bridge that's a little bit older. And then there was one barn along Miraja Lane. Those are the only 2 noted, I believe, in the CIA. But I don't think it's called out specifically on that exhibit what those items are. But I believe those are the only 2 within the site, the current site plan boundary. The CIA was done on a much broader area earlier in the process of land acquisition.
No more questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Montgomery, any questions for this witness?
Yes, just a few, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Albrecht.
Good morning.
I have, the first one, like Deputy Secretary Lyon said, Ms. Carr's done a great job of just covering a lot of the questions to where I really don't have to ask many. But one I do have is, you mentioned in your testimony that you will be hiring an EPC. Will that EPC also be contracted for the O&M phase?
I would be a separate party for the O&M, most likely.
And then, in reading the economic impact analysis put together by Mangum, it shows during the O&M that there would likely be 1 direct hire and 3 indirect hires. Based on your experience, is that consistent with other projects you've worked on?
For a project this size, being 120 megawatts, I believe that's accurate.
And I believe, I think I've seen this, but just want to make sure it hasn't changed. Do you all plan to enter into a pilot or IRB agreement with either county?
We don't at this time.
That's all the questions I have for this witness, Mr. Chairman.
Judge Dougherty, do you have any questions?
Yeah, on the roads, one thing that we're concerned about is possibly during the construction phase of this project, will they make for sure that the roads are put back in the shape that they were in after the project is complete?
Judge, are you referring to your own county roads or the state roads as well?
The county roads, and I guess any road would be, it'll affect the whole area. So, yeah, any road, I would say.
At this time, I don't believe we're obligated to improve the roads, but we can follow up with your county department, road department, if there are any specifics you'd like to have us include.
Yeah, I know on another project, there was a bridge on Horn Lane that was an issue that probably needs to be replaced before the project begins. I didn't know if that's something that you all would do or not.
Yeah, we're open to it, Judge, if you have specific requests that you'd like us to look into.
As far as encroachment permits, we typically, when there's an entrance put in a county, we have the right to take a look at it before we approve them, and we recommend that they be wider than a normal entrance due to the fact of your size of your equipment that you're going to be using. So, is that something else that we'll be able to work with you all on, or require, I guess?
So these would be like egress and ingress turns from public roads? Is that what you're speaking to?
Typically, our roads are narrow, and it's a lot harder to turn big equipment in. So, I think our normal entrance is not very wide. So, I think it's going to require a lot wider encroachment to a county road than normal. So, I mean, we're here to work with you, but I think that's something we need to take a look at.
Yes, and I believe we did identify that in our traffic study. The DRM prepared that we would need to have wider turn radiuses at several of the public roads.
I think that's all I have.
Thank you, Judge.
Vice Chair?
Good morning.
Morning.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh. So you said you were in the late stages of negotiating a build transfer agreement with LG&E KU. I think it would make me way more comfortable if it was already in place. How close are you?
From what I've been told, we're very close, but I don't have any specifics in
Yeah,
terms
to
of
the extent that you
final
can
date.
answer, because I don't want you to give away confidential information about the negotiations with LG&E.
That's all I personally know at this time.
Does that give you concern? That there's no agreement in place, you don't have a purchase power agreement, and you don't have this build transfer agreement in place yet?
It does not give me pause, no.
It sounds like you intend to build it, but transfer it almost immediately. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. So, you had testified earlier there's gonna be a separate party for operation and maintenance. That probably will not be Frontier Solar entering into that agreement. Is that right? That's something LG&E KU will do?
Potentially, yeah, I think there are two scenarios. If LG&E does purchase the project, they could seek to operate it themselves or have a third party operate it. Similarly, if LG&E purchases the project, they could also seek to have Bright Knight or Bright Knight's management company operate it, and very similarly have a third party actually conduct the work.
Okay, and the EPC firm that's not identified yet, is that someone that Frontier will hire?
Bright Knight would hire them,
Bright Knight will hire.
yes.
In that EPC agreement, will there be any expectation or requirement that local people are hired to do the construction?
Not a requirement, but That is our intent, that as many locals would be hired as possible.
And how would that intent be communicated?
During that negotiation process with the EPC.
Is that something that local people have mentioned at the public hearings you had in Marion and Washington County, that they would like local people to be hired first?
Not at this project, but Bright Knight does have several other projects in the state. We'll probably have 4 projects moving through this process within the year. On some of those projects that are coming up, yes, labor and workforce has been discussed in quite a bit more extent.
Okay. And so, when we're talking about the leases having requirements for dealing with water runoff or soil maintenance and even decommissioning requirements, anything that the leases would have, this is not something that Bright Knight will actually expect to be doing, right? These requirements will all be carried out by LG&E KU or whatever contractor they hire.
So during operations, yep,
The expectation is that Bright Knight, through its subsidiary Frontier, will build this thing. And then potentially you could be contracted with to do some of the services, but also potentially, just as likely, you would not. You would negotiate all of this, get it built, and then exit.
that's correct.
So I guess that just makes crossing all the Ts and dotting all the Is even more important, because anything that's not specifically in these leases, we don't have guarantees that future parties would carry them out. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay. And you've not done, as far as Frontier has not done, or Bright Knight has not done similar build transfer agreements yourself, correct?
Bright Knight has not done a BTA to date.
Okay. That's all the questions I have.
Morning. I'll start with the judge's question. Have you reviewed the Wells Engineering report filed in this case?
That's the consultant's report.
Which one is it, sorry,
The
specific?
consultant's report, the Wells Engineering that was filed into the record in which the applicant responded to?
I haven't, it's not coming to mind. Sorry, could
Okay.
you be
So-
more specific?
Okay, so the applicant, so in each of these cases, by statute, the commission is able to hire a consultant
Yeah.
who does a study and a review and maybe a site visit, and then files a report.
Okay.
And then the applicant is able to respond to that report. Are you aware of the report filed in this case by Wells Engineering, the consultant to the siting board?
I don't believe I've reviewed it directly.
Okay. Have you reviewed the applicant's response to the consultant's report?
Could you help me out, Greg, if you know what
Yeah,
section it is?
look at tab 24.
Okay.
If we could have just a moment for him to review, because I believe you have reviewed the.
Okay, it's just not coming to mind, sorry.
The consultant's report has recommendations
Okay.
for requirements that the siting board should consider. And then the applicant, you all, Frontier Solar, has responded to some of those report findings or recommendations.
So in your binders, tab 24 is their report that was put together by the consultant on behalf of the siting board, and tab 25 is our response to the consultant's recommendations. You and I have talked about this, so I know you've.
Okay, yeah, well, it just didn't come to mind. I remember them being there now I was at the site tour. I remember them being present.
Okay, are you aware of this response to the consultant's report? Have you reviewed it? Did you participate in the responses? Do you know who formed the applicant's position on these issues?
Mr. Chairman, my binder's actually out of order. Can I approach and see if his is out of order as well?
Sure.
And that may be his issue. This is the response that we filed, and I don't see where the response is, where the actual consultant's report is in here.
Yeah, you think it's just our responses.
Yeah, I think it's just the responses.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, he does not have the report in front of him. We got
That's fine, I
issued
just
that,
was
but
gonna
he does
ask
have
about
the
the
responses.
response. Have you seen this response before?
I don't believe I directly helped create these responses, but I can try to answer your question. to
Okay,
the best
do you
of my
know
ability.
who helped directly create these responses?
It may have been Armand, who's in the audience at the moment.
Okay, well, since you tried to answer it, let's just go to finding 5.
Okay.
It's on the second page. The restated finding here is the avoid using oversized trailers for material transport and limit the overall weight as per the bridges and culverts of the surrounding roads. Install new culverts if necessary. Do you see that?
I do.
Okay, and then the first sentence of the response says, Frontier Solar agrees with this recommendation to the extent that it can avoid using oversized trailers and limit weight on bridges and culverts. Now, this is not a question, but a statement. I don't know, that seems to be sort of a truism that I agree to do this to the extent that I can do this. I don't know what action that's actually agreeing to. So can I ask, from your perspective, per your response to the judge, whether you all anticipate limiting the overall weight on bridges and culverts?
For
Or
specific
fixing the or if you only have one way to get in and there's a bridge that won't hold and another bridge that won't hold, unless you reduce the weight, the only other fix to that is to reinforce the bridge. Do you all anticipate either reducing the weights or reinforcing the facilities?
At this time, the main access road will be along Highway 55, and I don't believe there are any bridges that have weight limits that would be of concern to us. A lot of the smaller bridges on the site are on the northwestern side of the site, and they're county bridges. They do have posted weight limits, and I would expect that we are underneath those weight limits. Otherwise,
All those things are fine, like statements. None of them are commitments to say, yes, we won't, go over bridges that are in excess of the posted weight limit or an agreed upon weight limit with the county
Understood.
road department. Like none of the, I'm asking for your all's position as to what you will do, not what you could theoretically or conceptually do.
okay. But I feel like you're asking me if we were to plan a load to travel over a bridge that was more than the posted weight limit, would we improve it? That's
No,
what you're
I'm
asking.
asking, what would you do? Would you, do you commit to not going over bridges and culverts in excess of the rated or stated weight limits?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, we have another witness here, Praneeth, who may be able to speak more clearly on roads and the situation, the condition of the roads, and how Bright Knight will handle the roads if they need to be improved, such as they may be required. So we can get you some clarification on that today.
Yeah, and I mean, here's the concern. It later says the project, I don't know, that project is a defined term, but it's capitalized. I'm looking here. Anyways, it says the project will consult with KYTC, the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet,
Yep.
and local road authorities regarding truck and construction traffic and obtain all necessary roadway permits. I guess what I don't have an appreciation for is, what if there's a disagreement with the county, for instance, on what the roads do or do not require? Are you all committing to do that, or are you just stating that, like, that's the plan?
But I think going back to sorry, would you
Could
like
you
to say
clarify
something?
what you mean by what the roads require? Are you talking about the weight limit?
Yeah, the
or
weight,
just
the weight limits, or the ingress, judge used the term ingress, or the terms ingress and egress. The judge specifically talked about encroachment, those kind of requirements.
And if I may, part of his problem may be that the state actually requires routes for certain equipment, so it
For
won't
state
be-
routes.
Yes, so it won't be the project's choice on some of these, like bringing in the transformers, the state's just gonna tell them where they have to go.
And that's the case with state roads, but I'm asking specifically about county roads. Do you all commit to working with the county to come up with what is necessary, any quote road agreements with local authorities?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Mark that off. All right. Solar facilities are generally able to receive, and I'm talking broad strokes here, investment tax credits or production tax credits relative to their construction or their production, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you kind of have to know which one you're going to use when you build it, because if you build it and move down the road too long, the ship has passed for the investment tax credit. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
Okay. And then you're stuck using the production tax credit portion, right?
Yes.
Mutually exclusive. Okay. Do you all plan to have an off-taker or a purchaser or whatever you may want to call it prior to breaking ground on the facility?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And is that for financing purposes? It's easier and cheaper to finance something when you know at what price you can sell it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So if you're gonna do a PPA or you're gonna do a build and sell, are those two different financing paths?
Yes.
Okay. If you're going to do the PPA, in your experience, does that normally include or could include transfers for tax equity purposes?
It would include a tax equity partner, yes.
How about if you're just going to build it and sell it? You already have an agreement in place to build it and sell it to somebody. Do you all go through the same tax equity financing as you would if you were doing a PPA?
I believe it would be similar, but LG&E would have to also kind of agree to that structure.
Okay. So you've adopted, the data request response of witness Adams, right? The PSC, the citing board question 1-8 about the organizational structure of FRON BN and its parent companies. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. And so that data request says that the applicant here is owned by Bright Knight US DevCo LLC,
Yes, sir.
which seems to be a wholly owned subsidiary of Bright Knight US Roman numeral 3 LLC, which seems to be a wholly owned subsidiary of Bright Knight US Roman numeral 2 LLC, which seems to be a wholly owned subsidiary of Bright Knight US LLC, which seems to be a wholly owned subsidiary of Bright Knight LLC. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So it's correct that all of those entities are wholly owned subsidiaries?
Yes.
Okay, and I want to check that because at the top it says, there's a little asterisk and states all entities are 100% owned unless otherwise stated. In addition to ownership, does that mean that by definition, because they're 100% owned by their corporate parent, that the corporate parent is the member manager of each one of those LLCs?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay. Does FRON BN LLC have any employees?
No.
Okay. Earlier, the vice chair asked you a question of if you go the PPA route and you get an off-taker and you all operate the facility but sell the power to someone else pursuant to a contract, and you've hired an EPC, they built it, now you're also hiring an O&M entity to run it, that the O&M entity, the person servicing it, would not be an employee of Frontier Solar. They would not be, quote, hired by Frontier Solar, but they would instead be hired by Bright Knight. Do you remember saying that?
I did, yes.
Which Bright Knight?
The Bright Knight LLC, so the top one.
The top one?
Yeah.
Okay. So that raises this additional question. If Bright Knight hires them, who are they paid by?
Bright Knight LLC.
Okay. So Frontier Solar is getting the money for the power they sell, and that conceptual or theoretical thing, but the cost of operating it are carried by a different entity. Is that your experience?
That's my understanding at this time.
Okay, that's fine. So Bright Knight LLC has employees, right?
That's my understanding.
Okay. Are you an employee of Bright Night LLC?
That's my understanding.
All right. Do you know whether Bright Night US LLC, Bright Night US Roman numeral 2 LLC, Bright Night US Roman numeral 3 LLC, or Bright Night US Devco LLC, do you know if any of those entities have employees?
I don't at this time.
Okay. Is it your understanding that, insofar as you all, let's just stick with the simplest form of this question. Insofar as you all have made commitments, Frontier Solar has made commitments, as the applicant in this proceeding, is it your understanding that the entity that will ultimately be buying things, hiring people, and employing people to further those commitments, that entity is Bright Night LLC?
That's my understanding, sir.
Okay. In the application, one of the minimum filing requirements is to identify, and it was cited, I think, in furtherance of this question in the first data request.
Okay.
The question is, or you have to state whatever you want to say. The applicant has to indicate the record of environmental violations. Are you aware of that filing requirement in this case? In all these cases?
Where is it located? Sorry, say
It's in the application.
Okay.
The statute indicates that the applicant, that you have to state whether there is a history or currently pending matters regarding
yeah.
environmental violations. Are you
Okay.
generally aware of that?
Yes, sir.
Statutory requirement? Okay. And so I think the statute, and I'm just restating your all's response here, but I think the statute asks whether the applicant or any entity with ownership interest in the project, or that's the way it's restated in the application, whether they violated any state or federal environmental laws or regulations, and to indicate whether there are pending actions, judicial or administrative, against the applicant or any entity with an ownership interest in the project. You're aware of that?
Do you need a reference to figure out where the response is in the application?
If you could provide one, that would be great. Yeah.
I mean, the answer is just no, but
Yeah, the answer is
are
no.
you aware of who gave the information to answer that question?
I mean, are you asking like a specific member of our team or?
Yeah.
Not at this time. I don't know exactly who would have. I mean, in summation, we have several consultants working on the
Okay.
project, coming together to answer that question.
Well, you say consultants. I mean, I don't know that consultants would be intimately familiar with the corporation's history as it relates to
Oh, I'm
environmental
sorry. I thought-
violations.
Yeah, maybe you'll have to restate the question. I thought you were describing environmental concerns on the project. You're talking about at the corporate level. Okay, yeah.
Okay, so the statute
Yeah.
says, tell us whether the applicant
Mm-hmm.
or anyone with an ownership interest in the applicant has violated any state or federal environmental regulations or laws.
Mr.
I
Chairman,
understand.
if you know what paragraph this is in the application, that may help jog.
It's
his memory.
page
Actually, I
11 of
just
the
found it.
application, but
It's paragraph 34 of the application.
page 11, paragraph 34, section 11.
Sorry, your question was way more simplistic than I thought. I mean, it's basically, it's our CEO, Martin Herman, is the owner of the company.
They gave that information.
He's the one that's able to say that, yeah.
Oh, and that's fine. So
Yeah.
I don't have an affidavit to say like, this is the person who, but that's the first question, who gave the input? Do you know to which entities, quote, with an ownership interest, that answer was, that answer referred to in the negative? Does that make sense? So, okay, let's take a step back. We just walked through the corporate structure.
Yes, sir.
The applicant is a wholly owned subsidiary of Bright Night US Devco, right? Yeah, I'm sorry, you gotta audibly say it.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Is the answer referring to, when it says anyone with an ownership interest in, is it referring to that US Devco? Or it is referring to the company that 100% owns it? Or also include, which would be, we'll just say Roman numeral 3, Roman numeral 2, Bright Night US whatever LLC? Or does that include the entire corporate structure?
It should be the entire corporate structure, sir.
Okay, so as a post-hearing data request, I'd like to confirm
Yes, sir.
that in saying no one has environmental violations, that referred to the applicant and all entities that directly up that corporate structure in response to 1-8. Okay. What type of transmission service did you all apply for in the transmission interconnection queue with LG&E KU?
We applied for both NRIS and ERIS, so we were studied both ways.
Okay, what do you expect if you're about to sign a LGIA? Which one do you intend on signing an LGIA for, ERS or NRS?
NRIS, so
Okay. Is it your understanding that that is a prerequisite for finalizing any sale of the facility or a PPA? For any of the conversations you've had, is having network service, in your experience, a minimum requirement in most of these,
I
in your
don't know if
experience
it's
in most of these
explicitly
cases?
listed in this agreement with LG&E.
Okay. But you all anticipate, the plan is to sign an LGIA with NRS service?
That would be my expectation, yes.
All right, so we've got all these projects. We've had like 40 of these filed with us in the last 4 years. What are you all putting more than 3 feet below the ground?
To my knowledge, nothing. Yeah.
Okay, so why the caveat with the decommissioning?
I believe it's just kind of been a standard adoption by the industry to say 3 feet or below, because it's basically uneconomic to pull things out of the ground that are deeper than that, but it also does not impact agricultural use afterwards. So I think this Joe Albrecht's opinion, just from general renewable understanding, they also do that for wind farms and things of that nature, where you have like larger foundations.
Let's say, but the
subsurface.
foundations for
So, yeah, so
a
maybe
wind
like
facility is in excess of 3 feet.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that just kind of gets rolled into a lot of these agreements, but that's purely my opinion.
But
sir.
I find it hard, would you find it hard to believe that farmers who lease their land and put thousands of cubic feet of concrete in the ground anticipate coming back and farming wherever those huge foundations were planted?
They may, I mean, if you have 3 feet of topsoil on top of it.
Well,
Yeah.
That's the expectation. It's gonna, that materially, you have to do something different after that, right? You're gonna have to put backfill in. The anticipation here is that you all are just pulling stuff out of the ground and leaving the ground the way it is, right?
Oh, well, we're replacing topsoil where there's, yeah, some form of, like if there was a depression from removing some piece of concrete, yeah, we would backfill that with topsoil.
But
Or
the
suitable soil.
the concrete's only being used for what, pads for inverters?
Yeah, inverter pads, substation pads,
Okay.
yes.
So maybe max one large and then maybe 1 to 2 dozen small concrete pads that are, what, less than 6 inches into the ground?
That'd be my expectation, yes.
Okay. So you all don't plan on putting anything into the ground in excess of 3 feet? Is that right?
They couldn't, yeah, otherwise be easily removed. Like a pile, for example, would penetrate deeper than that, but yeah, you would pull it out easily.
Laterally, you don't anticipate putting anything into the ground in excess of 3 feet?
That's correct, yeah. Trenching would be 3 feet or less for the medium voltage lines.
But screws or piles, those would go into the ground vertically?
Yes,
Okay. And they would be removed from the ground vertically?
yes.
Do you plan on, so the site plan, we've been told, has not changed since the application, is that correct?
Correct, other than the amendment we made this morning with the
Yeah.
transmission line.
So
Yep,
the site plan of the generation facilities has not changed since the filing of the application?
that's correct, sir.
Okay. So there should be no inconsistency with the distances identified in the motion for deviation, and no inconsistencies between that and the noise study that was conducted that noted the distances to receptors that represent homes.
Well, that's, I don't actually believe what's in evidence at this time. I think there is an inconsistency that he can explain, but I don't want him to testify that that's accurate, because I'm not sure that it is.
Well, that's why I'm asking. I don't think it's accurate. That's why
Yeah.
I'm wanting to confirm that we're saying this is the site plan, but
Yes.
that we have all these numbers that are supposedly representative of the site plan
Yeah.
that's not the case, right?
Right, yeah, you caught on to something that we also noticed in mapping the site. So Bright Knight prepared the site plan. We shared that with ERM, our consultant, who then did the noise and distance calculations. And that's where the distance mentioned in the motion for deviation is slightly different than the setbacks that Bright Knight mentioned separately. And we believe that is because of the way the mapping was done. I would refer to it as a projection issue. So our drawing was done in AutoCAD, and then that was imported into, let's say, Google Earth to draw the distances. And we believe that's why there's a slight discrepancy between,
Okay. Is
The two.
the noise study consistent with the motion for deviation?
the distances meant, yes. Those
Okay.
two, I believe, are aligned, yeah.
So for instance,
I believe there's a 2-foot difference.
well, that's, and 2 feet is fine, but what I'm trying to make sure I understand is if in the motion for deviation, it says that the neighborhood is at least 200, the closest neighborhood is at least 271 feet from a panel, a generating facility, then by definition, does that mean that no home in that neighborhood is closer than 271 feet?
I believe that's accurate, yes, sir.
Okay. So what I would like, as a post-hearing data request for you all to do is to is to first confirm that the distances in the noise study are still accurate. Second, is to identify in the exact same format they're laid out and in the exact same way, as long as they're accurate, to identify which neighborhood each of those noise receptors that are a home reside in, and which of those homes are participating homeowners.
Okay,
And what I'd like for you to do is do that by coloring each one of the rows. So pick a color and say these are participating homes. It's green, do a little legend. And so for all the rows that represent participating homes, we should identify those as green. And hopefully, if it's not already clear in the noise study, give us some reference to which home that is, which participating home that is. And if you could, frankly, tie it to one of the leases, so that we have an idea of why it's so we have evidence that it's
Yeah.
participating other than just it's green.
that's crystal clear.
So
Yes,
if you
sir.
have 4 neighborhoods, which I think from memory you have here, then you would have, I'm making up colors here, a blue, a red, a yellow, and anything but black. Anything but white or black, because white's everything else. Indicate this is neighborhood 1, this is neighborhood 2, this is neighborhood 3. Okay?
Sir.
All right. And
Mr. Chairman?
we'll write that down and file it as a posting data request, Mr.
May I ask, have you seen an example of this somewhere in
Nope,
one of
just
the
made
other
it up.
cases?
Just make, congratulations.
Okay.
Just made it up. But given the sort of varying numbers and the limited amount of time we have, this just makes the most sense.
It does, I agree,
Just take those charts you have and tell us which neighborhood they're in.
absolutely.
Happy to do that.
I do think that a number of studies that we've gotten have indicated which are at least the closest participating, the closest non-participating, closest home within this neighborhood. 4 neighborhoods is about the most that we've had from memory in one of these cases. It's usually 1, maybe 2. All right. All right, Mr. Dutton, any redirect?
Just a few points. Mr. Albrecht, how you doing, first of all? You doing all right? You need water, break, anything?
I'm good, I got water.
Okay, I just
Thank you,
have a
sir.
few questions. But you've been out there a while, figured I'd check on you. First of all, you had mentioned that you have several projects in Kentucky. Can you talk a little bit about Bright Knight's investment in Kentucky with solar projects?
Yes, sir. Yeah, at this time, Bright Knight has about 8 projects under development, ranging from early stage to Frontier being our latest stage project. They're in a number of different counties, east to west. Overall, we expect it to be about a $2 billion investment in the state. So we're highly invested. I'm an employee in the state. We actually have, in that way, local representation, which I think is great. It's one of the reasons I came to Bright Knight to work on this portfolio of projects. But yeah, we very much expect to have at least 3 to 4 sites like Frontier coming through the siting board in the next year.
Okay. We talked a little bit about the substation. Is it your understanding that the NESC rules require individual fence for the substation? Are you familiar with that? If not,
I'm
we
not
can ask another
completely
witness.
familiar with that. Yeah, if we could
Okay.
defer that. Yeah, if we could
can ask
defer
another
that to Praneeth, that
Okay.
would be great.
We can do that.
Thank you.
We talked a little bit about the CIA. Is it your understanding that the cultural features that were identified are all outside of the project's footprint?
Other than the two I mentioned, one being a county bridge, and then the second being an older barn, I don't believe either of them are actual, like, historical locations in any way. They just showed up on a database that ERM, I believe, pulled, but Michael, I think, can comment on that further if needed.
Okay. You talked a lot about the agreement that is in the process of being negotiated with LG&E. Is it your understanding that LG&E, and maybe LG&E and KU, already have a CPCN from the Public Service Commission for acquisition of this project? Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Also, are you familiar with it looks like a GIA interconnect agreement that was signed late last year?
The actual agreement is signed?
Mm-hmm.
I have not seen the signed agreement.
Okay.
My understanding was we were waiting for a PJM affected system study to be
Okay.
finalized. There was some kind of error or discrepancy in that, so it was taking a bit longer.
And that's perfectly fine.
Thank you.
I believe that's all my redirect, Mr. Chairman.
Would you like to make a motion on your exhibit?
I would. I'd like to have this entered into the record as applicant's Exhibit 1.
Any objection? All right, so granted. So moved. All right, we will take a short, let's take a short 10-minute recess, and then we'll come back with the rest of your witnesses.
Sounds great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We'll be recessed until 10:40 Eastern.
Thanks.
back on the record in case number 2023-00360. Mr. Dutt, anything else with this witness?
No,
Okay. You may, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, may he be excused.
Yeah, you may step down.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Dutt, I'd like to call your next witness.
Our next witness is Michael Tincher.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct under penalty of perjury?
Yes, I do.
Please state your name and address for the record.
Michael Tincher, and then my address is 971 West Virginia Route 34, Suite 800, Hurricane, West Virginia.
Mr. Dutt?
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Tincher, who do you work for?
Environmental Resources Management Incorporated,
And what is your role with that company?
project manager.
And what was your role with regards to this application and the materials we've submitted in support of that application?
I help put together and manage various different environmental aspects or environmental studies for the application itself.
Is there anything in the record today that you would like to amend or clarify?
No, sir.
With that, I tend to the witness.
Counsel?
Just a few questions. Mr. Tishner, are you able to answer questions about the setbacks?
Yes,
Do you know the distance from the closest panel to any residence?
it's 271 feet.
Is that the actual, for the residents?
For the
not-
residents,
For the
correct.
resident. Is that a participating landowner or a non-participating?
That one is a non-participating landowner.
Have you had a conversation with that landowner?
I have not, no.
Has anybody had any conversation about the distance that that panel will be from their home?
I'm not for sure, I do not know.
What is the distance from the closest central inverter to any residence? Not neighborhood, but residence?
The neighborhoods we don't have measured on the record at the moment. We only have it to distances, or we only have the distance to nearest residences.
Okay, all right, I'm gonna take a step back here and just ask. Do you have a copy of the motion for deviation, Mr. Dutt?
Yeah, he's
That you
checking,
can give
yes.
the witness.
Mr. Tincher, can you look at, tab 19?
Yes, sir. Okay, yes, so then, yeah, so,
Mr. Tincher, hang on.
Just wait. So you do have it?
yes,
Okay. Do you see in the first paragraph, there's a sentence that starts specifically?
yes,
Okay. Would you agree that the sentence says specifically, Frontier Solar seeks a deviation from the 2,000-foot setback requirement in KRS 278-704 sub 2 to allow it to place generating equipment no closer than 271 feet from the nearest residential neighborhood and to place inverters no closer than 1,110 feet from the nearest residential neighborhood?
yes,
Okay. Earlier, in your response to staff counsel's question, you seemed to indicate that you believe that the closest a home is to generating equipment is 271 feet. This would be read to say the residential neighborhood. Do you take that as meaning that you all, or the applicant here, did the measurement from generator equipment to residential neighborhood, not from the boundary of the neighborhood, but from the actual nearest home in the neighborhood?
I believe that our boundary, like the way that we delineated the neighborhoods, the residential boundary must abut the neighborhood itself for that specific instance that I was referencing.
You're saying you think that the home is the edge of the property line?
No,
Okay, so I have a house, right? It has a yard, and I have people in my backyard.
right,
Their house is a certain distance from my house. Their house is also a certain distance from my property. Those are two different distances. Is this measuring to the yard, or is this measuring to the home, this 271 feet?
I would have to follow back up with you on that one.
Okay, the 1,100 feet, the second part of it, same thing. Do you think you all did the same measurement that you did the 271, or could you answer on the 1,110 feet from the
No.
nearest residential neighborhood to an inverter?
That one is to the nearest neighborhood, 11,000, or 1,110 feet to the nearest neighborhood itself.
I get neighborhood. I'm asking what neighborhood reflects for the purposes of your measurement. Is it a home in the neighborhood, or is it the edge of the edge of the property boundary for the first home in that neighborhood?
The edge of the property boundary.
Okay, so you think that it's possible, and you're gonna check whether both of those have, other than measuring from, I get that one measures from a central inverter, I assume a central inverter, actually, I should have, you think they're central inverters or string inverters that it's measuring there?
I'm not for sure on that one.
Okay, let's just assume it's central inverters. You're gonna tell us in a post-hearing data request whether those are different measurements, so they definitely start from different places, because one starts from a generating facility, a panel, and the other one starts from an inverter, correct? But you think they might end at different places. That's what you're gonna tell us in a post-hearing data request.
Correct.
Whether they end at a property boundary, a home, or some other endpoint for measuring purposes.
Understood.
Correct?
We will do, yes, correct.
All right, counsel?
No further questions, Your Honor.
Deputy Secretary?
Yes, sir, just one. Good morning, Mr. Petitioner. As far as the damaged or non-functional panels go, how will those be handled throughout the life of the project?
I would defer that question to Praneeth.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Montgomery?
No questions for me, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. And Judge Dougherty let me know that he had to get off a few minutes before 11, but that he would be reviewing it later. Vice Chair, any questions?
I don't.
Did you? You worked on solar facilities before
Yes, sir.
in West Virginia?
Yes.
It surprised some people that West Virginia has lots more solar than we do. I think lots is a relative term, but it's also a quite informal one. But how close are those facilities to homes there that you've worked on?
Most of those are in really rural areas and not close to homes. I don't have a specific distance to it, but I mean,
A lot of people would say this is a rural area generally, right?
yeah,
But you're saying more rural than, your experience in other places has been more rural than this project?
yes, correct.
Mr. Dutton?
I have no questions.
All right, we'll have that post-hearing data request. You may step down. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next witness?
Our next witness is Praneeth Chigleri.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct under penalty of perjury?
Yes, I do.
All right, please state your name and address for the record.
Praneeth Chigleri. Office address is 515 North Flagler Drive, West Palm Beach, Florida. My home address is 2905 Citation Road, Salina, Texas.
We'll guess the zip code. Mr. Dutton?
Can you state for the record where you work?
I work at Bright Knight.
And what is your role at Bright Knight?
I'm the Director of Project Engineering.
And what was your role with respect to this application?
I'm the lead engineer for the project.
And is there anything currently in the record today that you would like to amend or clarify?
None.
Is it your understanding that the substation for this project will have a separate fence that goes around the substation?
That's correct. The overall PE facility will have one type of fence, and Within the PV plant, there will be substation located, which will be enclosed in a separate type of fence.
Okay. There was also a question that was asked by the deputy secretary regarding damaged panels. Do you know how damaged panels will be handled during the life of the project?
Damaged panels will be removed, they will be recycled, they will be shipped to the appropriate recycling facility.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Counsel?
No questions, Chairman.
Deputy Secretary?
No further questions, thank you.
Mr. Montgomery?
No questions, thank you.
Vice Chair. So what, who recycles, these solar panels?
It has not been decided yet for this project.
Yeah, I mean, do you know anybody in the state of Kentucky, the Commonwealth of Kentucky, that recycles them?
I'm not sure how to follow up on that.
Do you know anybody in the state of Texas that recycles them?
Unfortunately, I don't have an answer. I have to follow up on that.
Well, I guess my question is, you know, to say that like it's gonna go to the appropriate place is, I mean, again, another truism, of course it is. But what the appropriate place is, I think, matters. Some people may say the appropriate place is in this landfill, and there may be disagreements. No, it should be actually here, it should be recycling. But there's no, what I wanna make clear that at this point, there is no plan for, in the event that there are damaged facilities other than this would be the anticipation. There's no, what I'm trying to ask is there a written policy regarding it?
Not that I'm aware of. So all the damaged panels, we'll make sure to recycle them to the facilities that we have in the United States. At this point, we haven't really identified what exactly the plan is, but we'll address that in our O&M plans.
Okay, so in previous siting board cases, the siting board has put a requirement around what to do with damaged or removed panels. And it's a very generic statement. I guess what I want to make sure of is, have you been part of conversations where you've reviewed those requirements in other cases and had conversations about what to do in the event that it occurs with this facility or with other Bright Night facilities in the Commonwealth?
I personally haven't, but I'm more than happy to follow up on that and get a response.
Mr. Dutton?
I have no redirect.
Okay, all right, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Would you like to call your next witness?
Yes, we'd like to call Rich Kirkland at this time.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is true and correct?
I do.
Under the penalty of perjury?
I do.
All right. Please have a seat. Please state your name and address for the record.
Richard Kirkland, 9408 Northfield Court, Raleigh, North Carolina, 27603.
Mr. Dutton?
And who do you work for, Mr. Kirkland?
Kirkland Appraisals,
And what is your role there?
the owner. I do everything.
Small business, huh?
Yes.
And what was your role with regards to this application, the materials that have been submitted in support of the application?
I created a property value impact analysis.
Is there anything in the record that you would like to amend or clarify?
No.
With that, I'll attend to the witness.
Counsel?
Mr. Kirkland, can you describe to the siting board a little bit about your process of how you ultimately came to your decision or conclusion in this case?
Sure. We looked at all the solar projects we could find in Kentucky. We've done similar work in a number of other states. We've worked in about 28 states at this point. So we're looking at solar farms. We're looking at what uses are around them, so we can look at the mix of adjoining uses, how close homes are to them, and what the actually just generic property type is, residential, commercial, in that manner. We're also looking for sales of homes and sales of farms next to existing solar farms, so we can do a paired sales or matched pair analysis, which is simply doing a test case. We're going to look at a property that's sold next to it, compare it to similar property nearby, and see if there's anything that we can measure out that would be attributable to that solar farm. We've also done resale analysis, where we look at a home that is sold after a solar farm was built, but also we can go back in time and look at a previous sale before the solar farm was built. And we can compare that to the FHFA home price index to see if it is appreciated at the right method for that zip code. Make sure that that is consistent and shows no sign of impact. So we try to do both of those. We've also done assessor surveys to find out if assessors in other areas are finding any impacts that they're looking at. We've done research into university studies as well as looking at other appraisal studies on this subject as well.
Is it hard to make a determination about the value and the impact when there's been so few solar projects that are actually operational at this point?
In Kentucky, there's not that many, but we've looked at over 1,000 solar farms at this point, and what we've also been doing when we compare other states to these sections in Kentucky we're looking at, we look at the demographics, so we look at the population density around them, the median income, the average home price, and make sure that they are consistent and have a similar mix of uses. And so therefore, we figured some of these areas that are in adjoining states around Kentucky provide good data that we can translate to here and say, these are similar areas, we expect similar results.
How often are you in contact with other experts in sort of our part of the country regarding prices and impacts on solar projects on property values?
What type of experts?
Like,
I
do
mean,
you reach out to other appraisal and ask them, what are you seeing in your area? Like, for instance, you use North Carolina. Have you reached out to anyone in that area or North Carolina or any other states where you've actually had a consultation with them regarding this?
yeah, I talk with other appraisers in other states regularly, and I work with other appraisers in other states constantly. When we're compiling this data, we work with other appraisers and we work with brokers as well, just to compile the data. Whenever we find a sale, we reach out and call to the broker, either the buyer, seller, or both, and try to confirm that what we're seeing in the data matches up. Because sometimes what you see in the data, you find out, not everything is just in the numbers. Sometimes they'll say, like, well, this property was really dated. Everything still looked like it was from the 70s and it was road hard. So some things are not always readily apparent without having those conversations with the brokers. So we definitely go through and have that process to make sure what we're doing makes sense. Yeah, we reach out. I've worked with 12 MAIs across the country on this information, and we've actually presented seminars through the American Society of Farm Managers and Rural Appraisers, doing presentations to appraisers all over the country about the findings we're having and those results. And the ASF-MRA advocates the solar use as another property type or use that could go on ag land to diversify funds that go to farmers to help farms diversify and maintain and expand operations.
And when you say you're in contact with them regularly, how would you describe you've been in contact with them in the last 2 months, 3 months, 6 months?
I mean, I was speaking with an appraiser out of Illinois last night. So again, it's a constant ongoing process where there's an interchange with that. I'm working with an appraiser out of Virginia, Christopher Calia, who's working on some projects, and he's looking at solar impact analysis as well in Virginia. So we were sharing data about that. I was speaking with Andrew Lyons, an MAI out of Illinois that I just discussed, just looking at some of the university studies. So we are connecting and discussing whenever we find new information. And when I work in an area, I try to talk with the local MAIs.
What was your ultimate conclusion in this, as far as this project?
I concluded that as presented, the project would maintain property values around this project, that it's a harmonious use, and that the setbacks and distances were significant enough that with that landscaping screen, there would be no impact on property values.
No further questions, Chairman.
Deputy Secretary?
No questions, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, I apologize, but I am going to have to drop off. I've got a little emergency at home,
Okay.
non-health related. It's facilities related, and I really need to run home. So
Okay, all right. Thank you.
apologize.
Mr. Montgomery?
No questions for me, Mr. Chairman.
Vice Chair.
How many houses after the vegetation screen will actually have visual line of sight with any solar panels?
I'm not sure exactly how many will have visual sight. When we look at a screen, we don't assume that would prevent any view of any panels, but it filters the view. So again, I haven't done the sight lines to look at that exactly, but we're assuming that they would have a filtered view and a distant view.
Do the sightlines not affect property value?
Not when there's that filtered view. Like I said, we've got paired sales as close as 105 feet, and that's a project that's very close to my home. I think I've discussed it with you before, where they actually, the builders took down all the landscaping between them and the solar farm before they built. And it was the most expensive home they built in that neighborhood. But that is atypical. I would expect you to want to have that landscaping screen, and the crepe myrtles that they had planted around that, 3 years after that home was built, they were 6 feet tall, and they had screened it again. So again, they did replace the planting around it. But again, we see that those are going to be something that grows in and blocks your sight, but might not block your sight immediately.
That's always a concern at public hearings. People are worried about their property values because their view is destroyed by these solar panels. But is your testimony that it doesn't affect the value of their home if there's a view of solar panels?
Just because you can see some, again, if it's filtered, what we're showing is that actual sales data of homes are showing no impact on property value. And that's not to say that there aren't some folks who would not be concerned about it. Speaking about, contact with local folks, just this past week, I was just talking with 2 brokers in Virginia who had sold homes right next to an existing solar farm. It was a 20 megawatt project, Solidago. This is in Isle of Wight County, Virginia, but one broker starts off saying, look, we had a lot of people who came out here, had real concern about seeing the solar farm that's right next door. They could see it. But ultimately, the home sold for more than what the broker thought it was going to sell for, even if there hadn't been a solar farm there. And the paired sales matched up with that. She thought, when she did her CMA analysis, she assumed that it would sell for $550. It eventually sold for $555, showing no impact on property value. And when she said $550, that was assuming there was no solar farm because she wasn't sure what to do with that. When the appraiser who went and appraised that for the bank loan, he also said that there would be no impact on that. And the buyers were happy to have it there. So there were some buyers who were concerned and walked away from that sale, but it didn't impact the property value because there were enough people in the market willing to purchase it at that price. And the other home on the other side of that solar project, same thing. We had a 20-acre horse farm that sold. Had a horse riding ring and a lot of things like that. There was one buyer who looked at it 3 times and ultimately decided she didn't want it because the solar panels were there. But the buyers who did buy it, and again, showing no impact on property value, they were happy to have the solar farm over there because they knew there would be houses put there in the future. So again, it's not to say that there aren't people who have concerns about it, but the data is showing that that is a percentage of the market, but not of a percentage enough to affect the value and the competition that it has in the market space.
How many years have you been doing this exact thing where you would evaluate the effect of a solar farm on neighboring property?
Probably 17 years.
Okay. And I guess in that time, the buyer's market has gone up and down. There's fluctuation. Right now, it seems that houses are going for a lot, and that buyers are trying to find homes and snatching them up at what's being offered and or asked for the property or more. At least that's been my experience in Kentucky. Do you think that that's affecting current home sales prices, that they'll take them if they can find them regardless of a solar panel next door?
Well, again, we've got sales data going back to 2013 showing homes next to solar projects. We see them expanding and increasing. So this is not a recent phenomenon that is showing no impact on property value. I would agree that especially in, say, 2021, when the market tended to overheat quite a bit, it's hard to read the data because when there's a frenzy going on, when it distorts certain normal market conditions. But we're seeing the same process from 2013 forward. And that frenzy of 2021 has cooled off quite a bit. And so people are more discerning because of mortgage rates and things of that nature. So no, I don't believe this is something that is just a temporary thing. It's something that's been going on for over a decade that we've been tracking.
That's all the questions.
Good morning. So if I'm understanding you correctly, you do not having the solar panel there causes it to be less or more?
Correct.
Okay, and do you think that's a result of growth that people see that will be built there, or do you see that as people just taking property because there's a housing shortage?
No, again, I do not believe this has to do with any temporary market conditions such as a shortage or a surplus or anything. It is just it's gone through multiple cycles of real estate that we've been looking at this and seeing no impact. And again, we're seeing new home construction being built right up against existing solar projects. I mean, there's other land that could be developed, but they are still being developed right next to those. And whenever we see that, the most expensive homes in those neighborhoods are always the ones that back up to the solar project itself, primarily, we believe, because of the privacy issue, that people who have their homes backing up to it know that they won't have neighbors in their backyard.
Do you see any difference across the country when you've been looking at this, rural versus urban? Are you particularly looking at the rural areas and not urban? Or do you
Most
have
of
a
the
mix?
areas we've looked at are rural.
Okay.
There's, again, a small minority of these that are put in urban areas, but most of them are being placed where there's the vacant land to put them in. So the vast majority of what we've looked at has been in rural areas, but still with, nearby residential uses next to all of them. Or not all, but nearly all of them.
Okay, that's all, thank you.
Mr. Kirkland, you've participated as a witness in a number of these cases, is that correct?
It is.
Here in Kentucky specifically. You were a witness in the recent case of Dogwood Corners, is that right?
Yes.
Did you read the order in the Dogwood Corners case? And more specifically, did you read the concurring opinions attached to the order in the Dogwood Corners case?
I did not.
Okay. So would you be surprised to know that the two local members in that case both filed a concurring opinion disagreeing with the assertions made in the Kirkland report? I guess what I'm asking is, that company didn't tell you that two of the members of the citing board in that case disagreed with your assertions?
No one told me that.
Mr. Dutton, any redirect?
No, Your Honor, but just for the record, Bright Knight was not involved with Dogwood Corners. Is that correct?
I don't believe so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kirkland.
Thank you.
You have another witness, Mr. Dutton?
I do, Your Honor, one more. Fletcher Mangum.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct under penalty of perjury?
I do.
All right, please have a seat. State your name and address for the record.
My name is Fletcher Mangum, and our company address is 4510 Cox Road, Glen Ellen, Virginia.
Mr. Dutton?
Mr. Mangum, who do you work for?
I'm the founder and CEO of Mangum Economics.
And what was your role with regards to this application and the materials submitted in support of that application?
I supervise production of our report.
And is there anything in the record that you would like to amend or clarify at this time?
Not that I'm aware of.
With that, I'll tender the witness.
Counsel?
No questions, Chairman.
You have no questions? Ms.
No.
Moore? Okay. Mr. Montgomery, any questions?
Just a few, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Mangum.
Good morning.
So, in looking at your report, could you define what the project region is?
The project region would be for the local impact, which I believe is what you're referring to, or impact on the project region. That would be comprised of Marion County and Washington County.
Okay, and then the only other question I have is, what is meant by employment with the parentheses, job years?
The job year is, it's roughly equivalent to a full-time equivalent position. The reason that we use job years is that a full-time equivalent position is 40 hours per week. Those number of hours vary by industry. So the full-time equivalent that's used for each industry that's evaluated with the in-plan model would be different. But yes, it's effectively an FTE.
That's all the questions I have, Mr. Chairman.
Fletcher?
have a couple. Good morning. Just to go back to what you've put in the record, you think there'll be a one-time economic impact of about 58 jobs to Marion and Washington counties?
I believe, do you know what tab the full report is on? I believe that's a total economic or total job impact.
I'm sorry, I didn't
Do
hear.
you know what tab our report is on?
Yeah, give me just a second. Christina? Be tab 6.
I apologize, there are a lot of numbers in
No,
this. I
that's
didn't want to
fine.
misstate
No-
anything.
No problem.
Yes, the total employment impact would be for 58 jobs on the local study area, Marion County and Washington County.
And do you know how many of those initial jobs would be pulled from Kentucky? How many people would be employed in Kentucky in those the first 58?
Precisely, no, but I would assume that virtually all of that 58 number would be Kentucky residents.
Okay. And then you show, with that being a $17.8 million in economic output?
That is correct.
Okay. And then the ripple effect would support about 151 jobs. That would be the businesses that go up around there.
No, ma'am. The 150 jobs were a local job estimate that were provided by Bright Night. When we do this, we try to be as conservative as possible. So again, this is just the impact on that local area, those two counties, not the state as a whole. The state as a whole the impact for the state as a whole is in table 2. But in that total 58 employment or job number, you have 29 direct jobs that would be associated with construction. And again, we try to be as conservative as possible with that. So although Bright Night indicated there would be approximately 150 local jobs during construction, or Kentucky jobs during construction, that 29 within the local area, we usually restrict that to those components of the construction budget that we feel will be almost certainly local, and typically that's site preparation. A lot of the more sophisticated electrical work and other things would be done by crews that would come from outside of that local area. And again, the local area in this case would be Washington County and Marion County.
When you say outside the local area, are you referring to within the state of Kentucky, or are you pulling those people from other states?
In this case, it would be outside of the local area.
Okay.
In table 2, we're talking about outside of Kentucky.
And then, as we move forward, you show or estimate that there would be four jobs, full-time,
Within the local region,
within the local region.
right, there is one direct job. And again, it's important to realize that that is a fractional employment number. So for that one direct job, we know that 0.6 of that FTE would be 60% of the time of one employee with Frontier Solar. The remainder of that is done through the in-plan model, and the way that is calculated is by output per worker, which is a data point that they get from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, and it's industry specific. So for the remainder of that FTE, what we're looking at is the proportion of the budget that would be for vegetative control, the proportion of the budget that would be for maintenance, the proportion of the budget that would be for repair, and then it's taking that output per worker number and dividing it into that portion of the budget to identify an employment number, which in this case is a fractional FTE. So it's that composite that makes up that total employment number. It's not one job that's held by one individual. Those other 3 jobs are from indirect and induced employment. So that's business-to-business transactions is associated with, that are associated with that construction job, or the expenditures, household expenditures by employees. So they support those additional 3 jobs.
Okay, thank you.
You have a good idea of the, as broad concepts, economies of scale and economies of scope?
A broad concept, yes, sir.
So in this context, economies of scope might be that sending the same person to mow and the same person to clean the panels might be cheaper because they're already there doing both of those things, doing 2 different things, but doing both at one trip would be probably cheaper than sending one person out to do one job and then one person out to do another job. Is that a fair characterization of your understanding?
Typically, this would be done by different service companies.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm just saying that would be an example of an economy of scope.
That's entirely possible.
Okay, all right. So the reason I'm asking is, per the response that you just gave to Commissioner Regan, I just want to have an appreciation for what the expectation is versus what the in-plan model issues. You heard Mr. Kirkland's testimony earlier, is that right? Mr. Kirkland acknowledges a lot of these have been permitted, not many of them have been built within the Commonwealth, right? And so in-plan is pulling from economic analyses and data from all over the United States of representative properties and attempts to regionalize and localize the best possible. Or the information attempts to do that. Would you agree?
Mr. Kirkland's testimony was on appraisals.
Yeah, I'm not saying that. I'm saying, here, let me restate the question. We don't have a lot of local data within the Commonwealth of Kentucky to near as much as you would data from places like California, Texas, North Carolina, who have a significant number of solar facilities to pull experiential data from. Would you agree?
No, I would not. And
Okay.
the reason for that is the way the in-plan model works is, again, it's working on Bureau of Economic Analysis data that is specific to the locality and specific to the study area. So it's looking at that output per worker number in those industries that are specific to that study area. So those
Okay.
numbers are specific to the study area and specific to the industries that would be impacted.
Okay. So, so if you go to North Carolina, where they have tens of thousands of megawatts of solar facilities, and you hire a firm that comes out and fixes your solar panels, is it reasonable to assume that that firm, that O&M management company, whatever you want to call it, whoever does that job, is likely doing that job at multiple solar facilities?
It's entirely possible, yes, sir.
I mean, it's more likely there than it is here. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And if, let's just take at face value that we only have approximately 200 megawatts of solar facilities across the entire Commonwealth, okay, let's just assume that's the case. It's an educated number. It is, as we just discussed, less likely that the person hired on this project or on any project is doing the work fixing the solar panels and then going and doing that exact same job at other facilities within a similar locality, correct?
Well, again, Mr. Chairman, those numbers are based on an output per worker figure, or at least the ones that we don't have that are directly in terms of employment from Frontier Solar. Those numbers are specific in terms of output per worker for that locality. So I would assert that what you're going, or what you're directing toward, and or what I think the point you're getting to in terms of economies of scale, would be embodied in those figures.
Well, okay, all right. So if economies of scale assumes, okay, an increased in efficiency based on output of a homogeneous unit, and the person goes and works on this facility, and there are no more other solar facilities within 100 miles, what's the next homogeneous unit that person goes and works on?
Again, there are likely to be economies of scale in those figures, but in terms of the employee for Frontier Solar, we have that information from them as 0.6 of an FTE. In terms of the other services that would be purchased with respect to vegetative control, repair, and maintenance, that is an output per worker number, and those economies of scale, industry-wide within the state, should be embodied within that output per worker number. I'm afraid I'm not answering your question, but perhaps it's because I'm not clear exactly what your question is.
Yeah, I think my questions are direct. I worry you think you know what I'm asking and attempting to
It's entirely
asking a
possible,
question that I'm not asking. So there is a facility called Northern Bob White Solar that's proposed to be located just in excess of a mile of this facility. Are you aware of that?
No, sir, I'm not.
Okay. Are you aware of that just on Friday, the major generation and transmission cooperative in the area proposed a certificate of public convenience and necessity to build another facility within Marion County?
No, sir, I'm not.
Okay. What I'm trying to ask is, do you think by assuming that, knowing that there aren't any solar facilities built within this geographic area now, and understanding or assuming that more solar facilities are going to be built to support the types of O&M jobs, right? That assuming the numbers in the way you are understates the relative economic impact that these would have cumulatively, given that there are similar or homogeneous facilities increasingly located in the same area as this facility?
I think I understand your question now, and I'm afraid the answer to it is probably even more complex than what we've been discussing so far. One of the limitations of the in-plan model is that prices are fixed within the in-plan model. It's an input-output model. It's used for 99.9% of economic impact analyses within the United States. If there's a change in pricing, which would reflect a change in demand, which is what you're talking about, then you need a dynamic or a general equilibrium model, which are used in rare, REMI is such a model. They're used in rare instances. That would account for those changes in demand. This was not done with a general equilibrium model. So in this model, it is a linear progression. But again, when we're talking about fractional components of one employee, I'm not sure that the differences would be very large. Typically,
And I guess what I'm asking is directionally, is your anticipation that the assumptions around these, that the outputs, the assumption is about the economic impact of these facilities, do you think that is likely understated or overstated as the number of facilities increase?
I think it's understated, perhaps for reasons other than what you're asking.
Why is
terms-
that?
Excuse me?
So this is where in written testimony, the attorney just says, please explain.
Right. As the supply chain for that industry fills out, so that there are more suppliers for that industry within the region, then that induced and indirect impact increases. And that would be accommodated there. So, I mean, the indirect impact and the indirect impact, the in-play model takes whatever expenditures there are for vegetative control or maintenance is probably the more relevant one here, and lays it over the topography of the local economy. If those companies aren't there, those dollars don't land in the local economy. As that supply chain begins to flesh out, then there will be suppliers, and as a result, that indirect impact will increase. So yes, for that reason, as the industry matures, or that reason alone, as the industry matures, the impact will grow.
Mr. Dutton, any redirect?
No, thank you.
Is there anything else for this witness?
No, Chairman.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, that's all of our witnesses.
Okay. Would staff like to recall any witnesses?
No, Chairman.
All right. We'll have a number of post hearing data requests, which we'll provide in the record in a number of days pursuant to post hearing procedure schedule. We'll probably have that out in a couple of days. How many days would you like to respond, knowing what the questions are already? Let's just, we'll tentatively give you 14 days. Earlier the better. The regulations provide you a date in which to file a post hearing brief. I know it's prior to the submission of the data request responses, but also you generally know what the data request responses are, so I don't think there's anything prejudicial about it. We have the two outstanding motions to confidentialities, which we will rule on, and then your proposed motion for deviation from setback requirements. I would ask if you would, if pursuant to the post-hearing data, what you know the post-hearing data requests are going to ask, if you'd like to renew or restate or amend your motion for deviation from setback requirements, given the clarity around how the distances are how you all go back and discover how the distances were measured. That would be helpful so that it's very clear what is being requested. And I'll state for myself, one thing that's still not clear, pursuant to the current layout and the motion for deviation, and you heard the questions today, I don't know that we had post hearing data requests about it, but specifically, I think the vice chair was asking it, what the proposed screening and vegetation, what the vegetation and screening proposals are specific to the neighborhoods that the deviation is sought for.
Okay, that's helpful.
Does that make sense?
It does. With regards to if we have any changes to the motion for deviation, would you like those clarified in our responses for the post-hearing data request, or would you like a resubmitted, amended motion?
I would cleaner to a resubmitted amended motion.
Okay.
I would also just state, Mr. Dutton, that affidavits are always helpful as a basis for evidentiary weight. And so insofar as you, any of your subsequent filings in that regard, an affidavit may be helpful.
In regards to the motion for deviation?
Motion for deviation or even the amended indicate who is the one answering as to the appropriate distances. Because the noise study is the noise study. I don't know if it had a separate affidavit. There's the motion for deviation, which makes factual assertions that are now being updated. You know, if you're making assertions of a fact as proposed evidence for the citing board's consideration, I think an affidavit would go a long way in that regard.
Certainly, we'll be happy to provide that.
All right. Is there anything else from you, Mr. Dutton?
No, the only other item is that we committed to filing a lease for this parcel over the next week, so that will be filed as well.
Okay. All right. Oh, and did you have did you have a data request response that indicated the? I know you made the change on the stand, the distance from the transmission line. Was that previously the 50-foot? Was that a different distance indicated in a data request response? Let me just say it this way. Insofar as that's an amendment to someone's effectively testimony, if that's been previously stated in writing in the record, if you could file an errata, whatever you want to say, just a strike-through replacement, and just indicate in the cover letter that it's consistent with the testimony that was provided on the stand today.
Understood. We can certainly do that as well.
Okay. All right. Hearing nothing else, this hearing is adjourned. Thank you.